Right, so today I'm going to be giving an overview of how I work within Logic, some of the processes that I use, some of the things that I've found that really help my workflow. Um, Generally speaking, when I'm making a track, the sort of formation of it from the first idea to a final mixdown is going to be split into three separate stages, and it's very rare that I'll get past the first stage in any one sitting, partly because of time constraints. But the first stage I'll always start off with is sketching out an idea. Then I'll move on to arranging and sort of fleshing that out. I'll talk about these stages separately. And then finally the mixdown stage, which is probably where most of the sort of graft comes in. The first two stages are really the fun stages. I don't really enjoy mixing down, and my mixdowns I wouldn't say are the best. But I'll give an overview of a track that's been fully mixed down and that's been released. I won't cover mastering in this video, although I do quite often master my own tracks if I'm self-releasing them, or if I just want to send them off as a demo to a label. I'll do a master to give an idea of how it would sound if it was at the right sort of volume for a commercial release. But generally speaking, if it's going to be released on a label, they're going to handle the mastering. So all I need to do is make sure that I give them pre-master in the region of 6 dB or minus 6 dB, should I say. That's what the sort of standard seems to be. Personally, I think you can probably get away with anywhere between sort of -4 and downwards, really, because they can always add volume, but you definitely don't want to be going above sort of -4 because you're leaving them with no headroom to work with when they're doing their mastering processing. And I think -6 seems to be the standard, so I would always aim for that if I was going to pick a number. So in terms of, before I start sketching a track out, the first thing I'll do is I'll load one of my templates. Generally speaking, I always go to this one, which is, I think it's called 174 Basics, because it's at 174 BPM and it's got the basic elements that I'm going to need to start any track. First of all, we've got just an audio track, which is for just whacking in samples once I find them, usually through Loopcloud, which I'll talk through in a minute. We've got a channel that's just got the Loopcloud plugin on it, and we've got an instance of Kick 2 with preset loaded in. We've got a Pro Q3, obviously any EQ at this point is going to do a similar job. I do really like the Pro Q3, but I'll often use the Logic stock plugins, again especially at this early stage. That's just to roll off some bottom end, some top end, take out a bit of mud from the kick. Then standard clip, doing some really heavy clipping and then pushing of the gain. I won't go through clipping as a topic in this video, but I will leave a link in the description for the video of one or two of the good videos that I've found regarding standard clip. I mean, it's really good. It costs about £30, maybe a little bit more, I can't remember, but it's well worth the money. You can get some extra perceived volume, basically, is what you're aiming for there, but you can also create a lot of headroom and preserve a lot of headroom while still getting that perceived loudness, which is kind of a revelation, really. So if you don't use clippers, I'd strongly suggest you look up. You know, there's going to be thousands of videos on YouTube about them, and get to grips with them and maybe demo one or two. Another good one is Kazrog K-Clip 3. Generally speaking, I go to standard clip as my sort of go-to, but K3 is a bit more versatile in some ways because you can do multi-band clipping, so that you can really dive deep with that. And finally, on the kick channel, we've got a transient shaper. This is one of my favorites. It's the SPL Transient Designer Plus. So I'm normally just whacking up the attack to give it some, or bring out the punch on the kick, and then dropping off the sustain to keep it as snappy as I can. So I've not got a booming tail. unless that's what I'm looking for, but generally speaking it's not going to be, especially in drum and bass at this sort of tempo, because you haven't got that room for manoeuvre. If this was a half speed track, then maybe there'd be some room for that sort of tail. Now, in terms of my template, there's a few things that I like to have set up straight away, a few different options basically. So first of all, what I'll do is I'll drop down this menu here. So I've got split by playhead and join, which are two of the main functions that I'm going to be using once I start building up my track and I'm getting into the, well, even just the initial sketching and arranging part. But they're really helpful to have from the word go. I'll change this right click to the fade tool, which I'm going to be using a lot, especially when I'm working with audio, to fade out the tails of samples, to prevent clicks, remove any clicks, anything like that. I always have snap set to snap regions to absolute value, so if I'm dragging and dropping stuff and I want it to be bang on, it just snaps to that. Obviously there's some things that you don't want bang on if you put in little shuffles and hi-hat grooves and that sort of thing, but you can always manually move them off the grid. But I like to have it set so it's snapping to the grid straight away by default, so that I know where I am in terms of things being bang on when they need to be. And what I'll do is I will lock this screen. They're called screen sets now, so that's locked to number 1. So if I go off and I open the mixer window, which should just be number 2 anyway, which it isn't. That's fun. So let's have a look. Sorry. Apple 2. There we go. Let's say I'm working within the mixer and then I close that down and I wonder where my arranger's gone. I just go back to there and it saved it. So that's really good. Sometimes what I'll do is I will bring up the mixer window in the background of this. I'll have them essentially both available to me like that. Again, if I want to keep it like that, just unlock it and then lock it. And then if we go to another page, whatever it may be, we can just go back to 1. And the mixer window will be there in the background, so that's helpful. But yeah, so I've got my template set up and ready to go now. Diving into Loopcloud. I'm not going to go over Loopcloud in full detail here, but I'll give a quick overview of sort of how I work with it. So, got some drum loops here. Look. So, I'm just going to pick anything at this point. I'm going to whack that drum loop in. Now that drum loop itself is at 173 BPM, but because I've got Loopcloud synced up to Logic, it knows I want it at 174. I can override that if I want to, but I don't. So I'm bringing that in, and that should just play nicely. Just loop that. There we go, we've got that running in the background now. Generally speaking, especially more recently, I'm trying to get away from just dragging and dropping big loops in, especially drums, because while you're time stretching, I mean, don't get me wrong, the Loopcloud algorithm for time stretching seems really good, especially compared to some other time stretching. Like, it may even be better than time stretching within Logic, but if I'm using musical elements, I'm not too fussed about this. But if I'm using it to import a drum loop, anything more than a single hit basically, what I'm probably going to do is use the function to get it to my BPM to audition a sound. So let's say we want to start adding more loops here. Got that in the background. And we can listen to other stuff and it's all snapped up, it's all linked in and all synced up. So that's great for just exploring, finding sounds. Now, what I'd normally do is when I'm happy with something, again this is just for drum loops, is I would import it into Logic at its original tempo, and then I would go in and I would chop it up manually and move it so it's hitting in the right spots, because then you're not getting any sort of weird artifacts that are potentially being created by the algorithm of the time stretching within Loopcloud. If I was going to take a string sample or a piano loop or something like that, again, generally speaking, I'm going to be chopping it in once I've brought it into Logic anyway. It's quite rare that I'll just wholesale dump a big 9-bar loop in there and just keep it like that. Sometimes I will, but I try and put my own stamp on stuff in some way once it's within Logic through processing of various types. But I'm not too worried about these artifacts when we're talking about something like a piano sample, because I think, yes, there may be some there, but they're very, very rarely noticeable. Whereas if you compare a drum loop that you've time stretched to one that you've manually chopped up and then placed, there's usually a big difference in sound quality. So that's something to bear in mind. But let's say I've chopped this up and I'll put it in where I want it to. Again, the beauty of Loopcloud is we can just start looking for different things. So I'd normally start off by looking at maybe some atmospheres. You've got two options once you're in Loopcloud. If you have an active subscription, you can look through stuff that's in the store or stuff that's just in your library on your computer. You need the active subscription to either browse and buy things in the store, or to add your own samples from your own sample library. Now, I don't always have an active subscription to Loopcloud. I've got some points there because I recently did, I think, a couple of months in a row. And generally speaking, what I'll do is every now and again I'll do that. I'll do it for a couple of months. I'll have a few sessions where I'm basically just sample hunting, and I'll download a load of stuff, use up all my points or most of them, and then I might cancel the subscription before it rolls over. The problem with that is once you've not got an active subscription, you can still use the software, but there's a couple of things you can't do. So you can't browse and download from the store. Well, you can browse, but you can't download, so that's a bit frustrating. And you can't then add any further samples from your own computer into the program to then start playing with and previewing and importing. So it's important that if you are going to do that sort of technique and not just keep a rolling subscription going, then you want to make sure that every time you add new samples from elsewhere, other sites, or a friend gives you a sample pack or whatever, you want to hit add samples and then import them all while you've got an active subscription. Because once they're in Loopcloud, if you've got an active subscription or what, you can access things in your library and you've got all the functionality there. You just can't then add new stuff from the store or from your hard drive. But let's say we want to add some atmospheres. Again, just to show that you can still do this from within your own library. You're going to find something, anything, basically. Now this is at G minor. I don't always know what key I want my tune to be in, but this is where I'll start finding out, because I'll find a loop that I like, but I'll almost always look to pitch it up or down just to change it up a bit. Now this is playing at half speed for whatever reason. Loopcloud sometimes decides it's going to do that. You can change that there, or you can play it double, should you wish. I'm just going to put it at normal tempo, and I'm going to change it to F and put key lock on. There we go, that instantly sounds better. But no, once I'm happy with it, I would drag it and drop it in. And bring the volume down to match that other channel. Loop that out. So now we've got drums, we've got an atmosphere. Let's say we want to look for some piano. sound too bad, but again, you can see here, because I've left it on key lock and it's locked to F, what's happening is any sample, like this one is at C, it's pitched it up by 5 semitones so that it's actually playing at F, and then if I import that, it's going to import it to Logic, pitched up as it was within Loopcloud, and obviously again it's automatically synced the tempo. So in terms of ease of use, in terms of browsing and sort of auditioning stuff, Loopcloud is amazing for me, because I used to spend hours trying to work out the pitch of stuff, just auditioning stuff within Logic, within the Mac browser windows. I'm not musically trained in any way, shape or form. I wouldn't say I'm tone deaf, because I can hear when things are out of tune, but I can't listen to a sound and say, oh, well, that needs to be pitched up by 3 semitones to make it match my project or anything like that, and hat off to anyone who can do that, but yeah, that's just not me. So call it cheating if you like, but that's why I love Loopcloud, and that just speeds everything up. There's a bit of a common theme here. A lot of the stuff that I will kind of big up when I'm talking about my process is stuff that saves me time, because if I can save 10 seconds here, 20 seconds there, over the course of a project, that saves an awful lot of time, and that all adds up. And at the end of the day, anything you can do to help you stay in that creative mode rather than getting bogged down with technicalities, I think is always going to be a great thing, because it leaves more of your energy for the fun stuff, which is the creative side, which ultimately leads to the track being, something that's either really well produced but forgettable, or being something that really moves people, which is obviously what we're looking for when we're making music, whether we're trying to make, move their ass or move their mind, or a combination of the two. That's what we're aiming for. But yeah, so that's just an overview of the first stage, which is sort of sketching. Just before I get into the Mixdown stage, one thing that's important to note from the word go, in terms of setting myself up to make the Mixdown process easier, is when I am adding things in, I'll normally have, as a bare minimum on the channel, a gain. Now, I'd normally have it set to minus 14 dB, and this is basically about gain staging, so that every track is brought down to a ridiculously low level, you might think, and you'll have to turn up the volume of your monitors, or whatever you're working on, your audio interface, so that you can start hearing things at a normal level again. But if you don't do this at an early stage and leave yourself plenty of headroom that you can add to the level at a later stage, when you're going through adding all your bus processing and all that sort of stuff, then you're going to have a real headache when it comes to the Mixdown stage. There's a quote from, I think it was a Ray Keefe article from years and years ago, that always sticks in my mind, where he said that, I think at the time Nookie did his engineering, and he said that he always used to get told off by Nookie for really pushing the levels too far in the early stages. And Nookie would say something along the lines of, you can add to things later on, but you can't take away from them. So what he's saying is, once you've redlined something, that's it. You're kind of screwed. With that in mind, another important setting, actually, that I meant to mention earlier, is that I always have pre-fader metering set, which is, you can get that from the mix panel, and then it's here, pre-fader metering. I think by default that's off. If you want to start working with it, I would just tick it there, select it and tick it there. You may already have that on, in which case you can ignore this bit, but I think the reason why it's important is because if you have it off and something is redlining, you'll see it if your fader is at 0, but if you start turning your fader down, let's say something is at +6, if you turn your fader down to -7, then that's going to show that that sound is at -1 dB in that example. But actually it's not, because what's happening is it's still redlining, but you're just turning it down in volume. But basically what you're listening to is a quieter version of something that's distorting because it's redlining. Whereas if you have your pre-fader metering on, it doesn't matter what your channel fader does in terms of the volume fader. The actual the meter reading that you see and the gain level is going to be determined by whatever gain it's at when it passes through the last plugin in your chain. So I do a lot, because I use pre-fader meter, I do a lot of the gain control within the actual plugins themselves. Usually I'll start off with a gain, and then on a lot of channels you'll see shortly in the Mixdown bit that there'll almost always be a second gain just to rein things in or push them back up depending on what the processing has done to the channel. And it's actually quite often with individual tracks I rarely touch the actual volume fader itself because I'm doing it all within the plugins. It can make things a little bit more lengthy because obviously it's nice and easy to just mess around with the volume fader, and when I get to the very, very final mix down, if I just need to tweak something a little bit here and there, then I'll usually use the channel fader, and I certainly do on my bus channels. A quick point about sends. I very rarely use sends, to be honest with you, because I just find it a little easier to just use the wet and dry controls within a plugin. So let's say if it's a reverb, I'll just bring it down so it's a very low mix. Obviously then you're not parallel processing, which is probably why a lot of people do use sends. And don't get me wrong, sometimes I will use sends, but they're not really a common part of my processing. But that's just me. If I did, I would probably just set up a bus channel that's labeled whatever, reverb send, vocal send, whatever. But yeah, so that's the sketching side, and then obviously moving on from that, I'd start building things up, get myself an intro, get myself the first drop, usually a middle breakdown, a second drop, and then some sort of either outro or sort of rollout. It doesn't have to be, obviously you don't want to just say, right, I'm definitely having 32 bar intro, I'm definitely doing this. You want it to, the arrangement to come organically and fit what you're doing. But generally speaking, that's what's going to end up happening. A good example of bucking that trend, which is probably why the tune's called this, was LTJ Bookham's tune. Came out a few months ago. It's called Flip the Narrative. I listened, when I first heard that, I listened back to it about 3 times in a row, which never really happens these days. Normally you hear something, you're like, oh, that's cool, I'll save that or whatever. But yeah, I was just like, again. And I think it was only on the second listen through that I realised there was no middle breakdown. It just starts, builds up, drops, then just kind of evolves, and then it doesn't even really roll out, it just kind of ends. But there's no middle breakdown. But I didn't notice that the first time around, and it's not a problem. I didn't say, oh, I wish this would just stop for 16 bars and we can have a little moment where it's all a bit dreamy or whatever. And I think, especially within liquid drum and bass, there's a tendency for people to just always have very similar middle breakdowns where they strip everything out and it almost goes to silence for the first 16. I think what people are doing there is they're just working with the dynamics. But that doesn't always work for me. Sometimes I like to carry the drums through, maybe for 8 bars and fade them out or whatever, just so it's not just like a generic, right, everything stops and there's a tiny pad in the background kind of thing. But that's all creative stuff, so I'm not really going to get into that. So in terms of mixdowns, I'm going to show you the arrangement for a track that was released mid-November on Wub Club Records. It's part of the Wub World Volume 1 compilation, various artists. Huge album that. If you've not seen it, go and check it out. Quick plug. But yeah, I thought this would be a good one because I was really happy with the mixdown on this one. I gave it a few tweaks just before I submitted it, the final pre-master for mastering, because I had a little bit of an opportunity, I had a bit of time to just make sure I was really happy with it. I'm not going to go through every single plugin that I've used here. I'm just going to give an overview of what I'm doing. So, starting off with drums, I've got various what I've called top loops now. These again will have probably been found in Loopcloud and sometimes chopped up, not necessarily chopped up. It depends what it is. I think if something's got lots of heavy kicks and snares, and they're like key elements, and I'm going to be chopping them up. Although I've only really recently started doing that, and this track was made originally a good year old, so I wasn't really in the process of chopping things up. Sometimes I was just kind of bringing in bigger loops and leaving them in bigger chunks like these, rather than going kick, snare, hat, etc. But we've got various top loops, and then every now and again we've got some extra breaks here, which are playing with some of the others muted, and they're just at the ends of 16s just to mix things up a little bit. In terms of the top loops, it's very minimal processing on them, generally speaking. That track's frozen. I'll talk about track freezing in a bit. So yeah, you're not talking much processing. Sometimes it's just an EQ, maybe an EQ and a reverb. And again, I was talking about the send thing earlier. We're only talking about a bit of wet there. This one's got a bit more to it. There's a transient shaper on there and an EQ really ripping out all the bottom end. These shakes have got a bit more to them. Got a bit of a Phil's Cascade here. Cool name. I don't even know what this is, whether it's a saturator or what, but yeah, it just sounds really good on a lot of stuff. Those shakers were actually recorded using my daughter's maraca that I think her auntie brought back from holiday for her. I just literally recorded them in on my phone, and I don't think I've done it. I've just created a loop out of them. So in terms of processing on this tops bus, let's just give it a listen. There we go. We've got transient shaper working on the attack. We've got track spacer, which is just ducking when the kick comes in to give the kick a bit more room. Got a gain at -12, which is what I was talking about earlier in terms of the gain staging. I've not done that on the individual channels here, although in a sense I have, because I've probably done it yet. So I've done it there on the main EQ, -7, and a -12 here. That's just giving me plenty of headroom to do things like this. So we've got some saturation going on. I think that's just on this top band. Take that off, that's making quite a bit of difference, especially to the top end. It's giving it all that sort of liveliness, shine. Direction mixer, so what I'm doing here is I'm making everything below 2000 Hz mono. Mono compatibility is a really important thing, and I try and make sure that I'm doing that as soon as I start loading things into buses. Sometimes I'll do it individually on each channel, or I'll do it at the bus level. You don't really want to be dealing with fixing any mono compatibility issues at the final mixdown stage, because then you might back yourself into a corner. And often what you find is that if you've not been taking care of it as you build your track up, you're going to hit mono, you're going to collapse everything into mono, and you're going to lose so much information, so much vibe, so much volume. If needed, there's ways that you can compensate for that. Bit of mid-side EQ, or even compression, or a combination of the two. Anything mid-side basically, where you can bring the volume or the dynamics of the mid information up to compensate what you lose if you do collapse it into mono, is going to help. But I mean, that's a whole different subject for another video maybe. Now in this one, we've got an Ozone 4. I quite like the stereo imaging on this because it's multi-band, even though this is an ancient plugin, and that's just stripping again everything below 2000. I'm not sure why I've done it on there as well as in the direction mixer, but hey ho. And then we've got a compressor, which isn't really changing the world, but I do like the way this just sort of glues things together. I mean, it's called the Townhouse Bus Compressor for a reason. It just sounds good when you've got multiple sources going into it, i.e. a drum bus. And again, like I say, a second gain just to rein everything into -1.5, get it where I want. And then finally, a bit more dynamic EQ in the Pro Q3, and this is just ducking some of the mid range so it doesn't get too muddy down there basically. And then we've got individual kick and snare channels. The kick is created within kick 2. I really like kick 2 because it's pretty versatile. You can use it for any drum sound you want, really. It doesn't have to be a kick, but essentially at its core, what it's doing, it's got this sub control here, which you can manipulate. I usually leave it on sign, but you've got a few different options, and I'm sure there's plenty of stuff that you can buy from the Sonic Academy site, where you've got different sub generator sounds that you can use in there, but you can cycle through them down here as well. You've got some snares and stuff in there, but it's really good because you start off with that sound, and you can load things in, extra layers, what they call clicks. But again, you could do this with snares. So you could just, if you're doing snares, you just mute that so that you've got no low end, and then you just load a snare or 2 or 3 in there. You can change these, you can manipulate these quite a lot. So you've got pitch control, length, so you can make them snappy or longer. Start, so that's the start point of the sample. And you've got low pass and high pass, and obviously volume within each of those sample slots, basically. You've got compression for the whole thing. You've got velocity, sensitivity adjustment. You've got distortion unit. You've got EQs down here. You know, there's all sorts of stuff that you can do. You can change the amplitude, the pitch of it. You can pitch it up and down in here if you don't want to just do it down here or with these. It's a really versatile plugin. I'll mainly use that for my kicks and my snares, but again, you could use it for hats, bongos, you know, whatever you want in terms of single hits, it would work well for. So we're running the sample through kick 2. Right, this is where you want the window saved as number 2. Sorry, the mixer saved as number 2, so you can just jump to it. There we go. Right. Getting lost now. So the kick, run it. We've got a basic channel EQ here, just taking out some of these low mids. Slightly concerned about that low end, but I've got a feeling that'll get fixed down further in the chain. Got a Moog EQ. What's that doing? That's giving us a little bump at 160. That's about it, and then a cut at the very bottom. A Millennia EQ, which is again cutting quite a lot, down at about 34. We're boosting at about 100, and that's about it in that one. And then yeah, finally we've got a roll off at the bottom end here in the Pro Q3, bit of tidying up at the top ends, and yeah, at the very top. And snare, it's going to be, right, there's 2 snares here, there's that sound. Again, quite minimal processing on them individually, but these transient shapers are doing a lot of the work here. So if I just take both of those off, completely different sound. Got another transient shaper because 2 isn't enough. This is on the bus, by the way, so these 2 snare channels are going into the bus. So we've got a transient shaper, Millennia EQ, boosting around 2K, around sort of 11, 12, just a touch, and at about 200, tiny boost. Gain, spreader. I'm not sure why I've put a spreader on that, to be honest with you. And then an ozone, which is again stripping it down to mono minus 2K. And then a direction mixer, which is again stripping it to mono at 2K, and then it's narrowing the stereo field of the anything above 2K. Seems odd, it's almost like I'm compensating for width that I've created through the spreader there. So don't know what was going on there. Gain -2 to rein everything in, and then So you've got your kick, your snare, and all your tops that will be going to a main drum bus over here. The reason why it's there is because I've created a track, and it just sort of then it moves the place of the bus. Normally all my buses are obviously all on the far right hand side where it creates them like this. But because I created a track here that I could do some automation on, fade out, low pass at the very end of the track, fade out the drums. It sort of stuck it there because that's just where I was at the time. So yeah, so in terms of the main drums, we've got quite a lot going on here. Basic channel EQ, little boost around the mids. Black box, this thing's amazing. It's a saturation plugin. Doing quite a lot of saturation there, and I've had to turn down the output. Sometimes I'll have the saturation amount down quite low, sort of 20, 25, and then I'll be boosting these functions here, and that will allow me to have the output out higher. You can get similar results doing it either way, but I love this thing, and I've got a few various different presets saved. Look, so we've got some for bass patches, some for breaks buses, individual breaks, drum buses, hat buses, kicks, kick and snare combos, some mastering ones there as well. I use this thing every project since I got it. It's got it in somewhere. It's just awesome. We've got a townhouse bus compressor there, and fairly probably just the standard setting. I've just tailored the gain makeup gain, sorry, a little bit. Ozone 4, this one's not stripping away the mono information, this is actually boosting the stereo image in the top end. Got another black box. Right, so this is an example of where, as I say, I've dialed down the saturation, but we're playing with these, which I believe are sort of distortion modules. Get a different kind of sound. Fresh air. Now this is quite good. It's very easy to make something sound naff, to be honest with you, using this. I think it works in moderation, definitely, just a few percentage points like these. But it just basically does what it says on the tin, gives something a sort of extra sort of top end air and sort of sheen. It's a free plugin from State Digital. I don't know if it's still free, but it certainly was for a long time. Again, it's worth picking up, especially if it's free. But once you start pushing this anywhere above sort of 10%, either of these, the mid or the high air, you're going to start really putting your foot in it. I find sometimes you'll do that and you'll think, wow, this sounds amazing, but then you'll come back to it, or you'll compare it with other tracks within your tune, and yeah, you just realise that there's no need, and it's easy to go too far with that. So that's just subtly doing a bit of top end, tiny gain boost, and a Fab Filter Micro, which was that doing that automation at the end. So listen to that. There we go, fading out. In terms of the other buses that I've got here, there is actually a hat send here. So I lied when I said I don't really use sends very often. I mean, it's true I don't. I've obviously used it here. So let me just hat channels. Here we go. Right, yeah. So that's being sent just subtly to a Modern Deluxe. I never knew I had. There you go. There's such thing as having too many plugins, because you forget you've even got stuff that looks like obviously some sort of amp emulator type plugin. Direction mix. Cool. So that'll all be getting fed into that drum bus. Or hat send into drum bus. Sorry, bus 4, which is the drum bus. Yeah. Basses. I've got basses. My basses are always made in Simps, 99% of the time. So we've got one that's from DS Thorn, a couple from DS Thorn there. Lush 101. which is by D16 Group. Really like that. 2 of them. Good old Native Instruments Massive. Native Instruments Massive and Massive again, and then good old Logic Retro Synth, which I really rate for a stock synth. I think it's really good. Now for most of these channels, as you can see, we've got the main bass, which composes or is composed of something that goes across the frequency, a sound that covers the frequency spectrum. So we've got some sub information in there. Dogs making noise. So we've got the sub information in there, and then we've got the sort of mid bass information in there. In some tracks, I'll separate those out if I think they need their own dedicated processing. In this one, I think I managed to get away with not doing that because I found sounds that just work well across the spectrum. But there are some places here, like basically I think it's the last 16 of the track yet, where instead of being like this, where we've got all this mid-bass information going on, all those channels are playing, but they're versions that have been bussed off to here, a sub bus, which is basically just ripping away all the top end. So as you can see, you're just getting the very low frequencies. So it's all playing the same patterns as before. Well, actually the patterns might be differently looking at the colour coding, but the point being that they're basically playing the same instruments, but that top end's rolling off and just leaving the sub. In terms of the mid-bass bus, have a look. Got a decapitator, probably obviously doing quite a lot of heavy lifting. Bit of a spreader at the top end. More stereo width at the top end. Quite unusual for me, to be honest with you. Then we've got a direction mixer, a bus compressor, again, and then again they're all being fed into that all bass bus. Just got a gain, track spacer, again that'll be ducking the kick just ever so slightly. Give the kick some room. Compression. That's probably just literally the default setting. I may have tweaked things a little bit here and there, but I find that tends to work quite well as it is. The Pro C and then Pro Q, again just carving various bits out that we don't need. Subtle boosts here and there. And then finally again at plus this time, presumably because of all that processing, especially the compression may have brought the levels down. Then we've got, I'll always have what I call a music bus, which is basically, as you can tell, music, but it covers everything like atmospheres, basically anything that's not bass, drums, effects or vocals, and effects and vocals will get their own dedicated buses. Again, with not too much going on. Vocals literally just got a compressor and a gain, and the effects has got a compressor and another compressor. Whatever reason, there we go, we've got a bus compressor. Probably just to bring out some of the more subtle elements within the FX channels. But yeah, with the music one, there's normally a little bit more going on. So we've got again a Pro C, we've got Ozone 4, stripping out the bottom end again. Alright, got Black Box, Saturator, and I'll give you, let me just show you with and without that, because I think it's going to be one of those night and day situations. So here's the music channel. This is with, that's without. Now in this case that is relatively subtle. I think you'd really notice it if this was on drum channels, for example. But yeah, it's my sort of top 5 dead or alive plugins, that one of them. We've got another bus compressor and a little bit of gain just to roll it off. Everything is going into the master, and normally my master has literally nothing on it. It might have a gain, Obviously I'm aiming for -6 dB overall, so I'll just run through the track real quick, just where it drops. We'll just see where we're at here. We're at I think it got up to about -7.4 there, which is actually quite low, but to say that's not a problem. It's better to be a bit low than to be too hot. So yeah, there's literally just that gain, just bringing that down a little bit, and that's really all that the master needs, because you're doing so much processing before the master. Some people like to mix into something like a compressor, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think as long as it's just subtle and it's not really giving you a false impression of what you need to do to your individual channels. But again, I mean, it's all about the end result. If you can deliver a -6 dB that sounds really good, then you're in business. It kind of doesn't really matter how you got there. Usually what I'll be doing is I'll have levels on my master. Now this is just for monitoring, basically. It's just a metering plugin. It's really good. I like the stereo field. It's got a big mono button, so you can just mono the track, and if it suddenly gets quiet and you're losing a lot of information, you know that there's stuff that you've got to go back and fix. In this case it sounds fine. There's a bit of a difference, but that's okay. As long as your main elements are there, then it's not too bad. But you just got to remember that club sound systems, the vast majority of them are still mono. I've read reports that some are starting to branch out into stereo, and there's this whole spatial audio thing that's coming up that may be the future that we'll have to start working towards one day maybe. And I know that some sort of major label stuff is already being mastered in spatial audio. I think Streaky did a video on it recently where he started working in that. But for now, if you want your tracks played on a club system, or even if people are going to play it on a portable Bluetooth speaker or on a phone speaker, if they're going to be an arse on the back of the bus or whatever, then you need to have strong mono compatibility. So it's really good to have a way to check that at the end, I think. And this also has some useful stuff like the dynamic range meter, LUFS, which you're not really concerned about at this point. That's something that you're going to get into when you're mastering, or whoever's mastering it is mastering it. I like having levels on there as well. There's a few things on here that I've put on, like sometimes I'll just turn on an EQ just because I like the basic Logic EQ spectrum analyzer. I think it's really accurate, so I'll just make sure that I'm getting this nice fat sub, and then from there it pretty much just tapers down. That's kind of what I'm looking for. Again, I'm bypassing that. Same with levels. I'm turning that off when I'm actually bouncing it, and the only thing that remains on there is the actual gain itself. Again, multimeter, that will have been put on at some point just to sort of check the levels. Now, I'm no longer running this. I had a trial of this Sound ID reference from SonarWorks, which I may well at some point go back to. Essentially what it does is you select a profile specific for your brand and a model of headphones, and it applies an EQ curve, a really intricate one, which I've tried to recreate here in Pro Q3. In fact, not on this track, but I think that's because I was using that. So I'll just show you just very quickly. This is the curve of this is basically me trying to recreate what SonarWorks was doing. So as you can see with my headphones, KRKs, I forget the model number. I think they're about 150 quid. So they're still relatively budget, but they're not, dirt cheap. This is sort of compensating for the curve that these apply. So as you can see, they're not flat, and this crazy curve here is trying to compensate for the fact that they're not flat and get them. Basically, what that sound ID reference tries to do is it tries to get your listening experience through your headphones as flat as it can possibly be. I mean, there's no such thing as truly flat, but it gets it, kind of damn near. I found them quite helpful. I think it's really important to. I think it's really important to always make sure that you're checking your mixes. Obviously, in different environments, like maybe listen to it on your phone, in your car, on a portable speaker, whatever, but primarily on headphones whilst you're on your door, because then obviously you've got the chance to address any problems. I need to give a shout to Karen K2T, who gave me some really good feedback on some of my tracks, and he pointed out that there was a lot of mid-range information going on there, a lot of sort of overlapping frequencies. And then I listened to them on my headphones, which I hadn't done for whatever reason. I think I just kind of fell out of the habit of checking stuff on headphones because I was thinking, I know that they're going to sound all right on headphones. There was a whole world of mid-range information there that I just hadn't picked up on these monitors. I mean, I'm using the Yamaha, I think they're HS7s. They're basically the smallest. I think they are the smallest Yamahas in this sort of monitoring range, and they just weren't giving me that information. I mean, don't get me wrong, they are good monitors, but there was a whole world of information that I just wasn't picking up until I put these on, and then I really got what he was saying. So that was really good because that enabled me to go back. And now I'm never going to finish a Mixdown unless I've run it through my headphones and just made sure that there's nothing there that I wasn't picking up just listening through my monitors. So yeah, I think that's a really important tip. And I'll usually be cross-referencing. Right, so I use Sample Magic's Magic AB, which I think has been discontinued, but there's a ton of different AB plugins out there. They usually all do the same sort of job. So let me just bring up the right one. For some reason there's two Magic ABs on there. Right, so what I've done here is I've got one of my other pre-masters that I was particularly happy with, a track that recently came out on Liquid Drops. Where You Want Me, go and check it if you want to. But if I AB to that, what I'm doing is I'm basically making sure that this track I'm mixing down there is hitting in all the right places. I wouldn't worry too much about the meters here at this point. I'm just kind of using my ears. Tonally, is it there? Are the kicks and snares hitting in the right places at the right sort of volume? Can I hear my vocal when it comes in? Can I hear the effects and that sort of thing? So yeah, I think that's really important. And you can always you don't have to use obviously a pre-master to do that. You could A and B to a mastered track. You've just got to obviously remember to gain match if you're going to do that and bring the track down within the AB plugin. You can do that here to match the average level of your track, otherwise it's obviously going to be an unfair comparison and you're thinking, well, why is my track so quiet? Again, if you can kind of gain match them, then you're going to be hopefully in business and you can start doing a fair comparison, and if there are any further tweaks you need to make, then you can go in and do that. Now, as I say, the mixdown stage is probably on average the longest part of the process for me. It's very rare that I have maybe 1 or 2 sessions of mixing down a track and then that's it. That's the last time I go back to it. That's just it's not me. I wish it was, obviously. But I think as long as you accept the fact that you're going to need to probably come back to it a few times before you're really happy with it, or before the label that you're sending it to or whoever is really happy with it, then yeah, as long as you're realistic, then hopefully you're going to be in a good place. I think it's also worth bearing in mind that when it comes to mastering, which again I'm not going to cover here, but I can do that if requested. The thing is, 95% of mastering is mixing, if that makes sense. Don't get me wrong, there are some amazing mastering engineers out there with thousands and thousands, and tens of thousands of pounds, hundreds of thousands of pounds worth, in some cases, of analog equipment, which would probably argue differently with me. But certainly from my perspective, if I'm going to do a sort of DIY master, I'm not polishing a turd. I've got to make sure that the mixdown is 100% as good as it can be, basically. Otherwise, I'm just fighting a losing battle. So the majority of the time really goes in the mixing stage, and then in terms of mastering, sometimes it'll only take me 20 minutes to master a track, half an hour. Anything more than that, then I'm thinking, well, I'm surely trying to correct things that actually can't be or shouldn't be corrected at this stage, and would be much better if they were corrected back at the mixdown stage. So yeah, any questions, comments, suggestions? Why did you do this? Why didn't you do that? I would have done this. Any suggestions? Like I say, I'm here to learn too. So hit me up with any questions, any queries, comments, whatnot. And yeah, hope you found this useful. And I'll catch you soon. Peace. One thing I did recently that's worth mentioning is I rearranged all of my plugins into their own folders, because obviously when you get a plugin, it just sticks it in here in the audio units. This is third-party plugins, obviously. You've got all your stock ones here, and I've just left them there just for reference. But then if you want to look at, for example, that Eventide thing, you'd find it under Eventide and Split EQ. I don't know, it's not very user-friendly, it's not very intuitive. Because if I'm looking for a compressor, I want to look for C for compressor. I don't want to think, oh, right, so I want this particular compressor, but I can't remember who manufactured it. Is it this one? No, is it that one? All those little times where you're dithering and wondering, is it this? Is it that? How do I do this? Where was that? Where did I put that? That's all time lost. And I'm sure a lot of people are saying, personally, the amount of time that I have to work on music is very minimal these days, what with family life and reality always knocking on the door. And if I can get a little edge anywhere, a little shortcut to save me even 10 seconds for each task, that adds up a hell of a lot. So whether it's rearranging your plugins like this, I can't remember exactly how you go about doing that, but again, there's plenty of videos on there on YouTube, obviously, about how you do this, but I've just arranged them into sort of what they do. So bass treatments, channel strips, clippers, compressors, DSs, delay, etc. Different types of EQs, so surgical ones, colouring ones. For example, you've got the Pewtech ones in there, that sort of thing, and so on. I don't know if you can do that with your instruments on instrument channels. I guess you might be able to. I've not done that yet. That's another job for another day. But yeah, I found that really helpful. So if I want to do my stereo placement, I just look for S rather than thinking what manufacturer did the thing that I want and all that sort of stuff. In fact, this is a good point to probably talk about freezing, because I will have frozen all of these. Freezing the track basically renders an audio file of it and plays that. You can't see it, it doesn't actually place it on the track. But it's a really good way to save CPU, because it basically puts the rest of it on ice, as in all the plugins. So the instrument that you're using, in this case that's Logic's Retro Synth, it won't even look at it. Let me look at it, sorry, because it's kind of been put in a deep freeze mode. But you can unfreeze things relatively quickly like that, and then everything comes kind of back to life. But while it's frozen, and well, first of all, to freeze something, you've got to play it through, and it basically bounces it down. It's a lot quicker than a normal bounce in most cases, depending on how many plugins are in there, but it's still a bit of a pain. So if you're going to unfreeze it and tweak it, you want to make sure you've done everything you want before you refreeze it again. But whilst the track is frozen, it's basically using, as far as I know, 0 CPU, which is huge. I mean, if I unfroze all of these, this project would not even play. I literally would not be able to press play. Maybe it would let me play the intro until more than sort of 3 or 4 elements kick in, and then that'd be it. So freezing is good. I tried to mix as I go, which is where your channel strip settings are really going to come in handy. I need to tidy these up. I mean, there's hundreds, well, not hundreds, but there's dozens here for different buses, for example. There's different mastering chains. There's different ones I've saved for instruments like bass buses, brakes buses, all drum buses. Some basic sort of regularly used effects like delay, that sort of thing, and snares, all sorts. And I think that can really help. Again, I'm never going to just set it and forget it. It's very rare. I mean, don't get me wrong, sometimes you'll land lucky and you'll find a setting that just works. But more often than not, especially as I'm adding more plugins to my arsenal, I might be adding them in because they might not be saved into these channel strips. But I think the channel strips in the first place save a lot of time and they just give you a really strong starting point. Obviously, not every plugin is going to fit for every occasion, not for every sound. And I try and make sure that I tweak them individually, but they just give me a real head start.